Hi boys and girls, it's me Butch. My name is Terry David Silvercloud. I'm 73 years old. I'm an artist in my old age, and when I was younger I was involved in high-end photography, fashion and advertising and magazine stuff. I'm a really good photographer. In my old age I'm trying to be an artist, and my passion is theoretical physics. I'm a queer man. I don't identify as gay because even in the gay community, I just don't fit in. I don't know where I fit. I've never much fit anywhere in my life, but I have absolutely zero sexual interest in women, none. And I'm attracted to guys, and they're usually quite a bit younger than me. I had a boyfriend for 18 years, but he died over 20 years ago. He was 11 years younger than me. So I identify as queer. And I'm a bit eccentric, to put it mildly. I don't know anybody like me, that's why I'm so lonely. A lot of people call me a Sheldon. I can see where it's coming from, but we won't get into that one. And you'll know what I'm talking about if you know what I'm talking about. So with this Me Too thing, I thought I have my bitches from the past, and since I'm old and I'm suffering from chronic pain, and sitting down is the best way to be, and I try to be useful. I'm making videos again lately. I hope the sound is good. I'm into my webcam doesn't hear me well enough. I have a soft voice, so I'm using some of my sound gear, but getting my webcam and my sound gear to get along has been a bit of a go, because when I upload things it doesn't come out the same as on my little computer here. I yak a lot. So you can see I'm a bit unusual. I have a really good theory about the speed of light. I'm not your ordinary queer, and I'm not your ordinary artist, and I'm not your ordinary anything. So I want to talk about my experiences in the past. When I was 18, I went directly out of high school into the Royal Canadian Navy. I flunked my math. I never did any homework, and I had no interest in school, even though I was really smart. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I knew there was something wrong with me, but I didn't know I was gay. I didn't know what gay was. That was back in the 50s and early 60s. How would I know what gay was? So I was quite reclusive and a bit of a nerdy type, I guess. And I thought I'd go to Royal Military College and either spend my time in the Navy or that's the best I could think of, because there were no student loans and we were poor, and I hadn't really thought about my future anyway. I didn't much care about anything. I just figured life would look after itself for some reason. So I'm 18, going on 19, and my mom wanted me out of the house. I was the oldest of 5 kids, and drinking so much milk I was bankrupting them. She said she went from 5 quarts a day to 1 after I left home. Doesn't surprise me. I still love milk, and I still drink a couple of quarts of milk a day. My coffee, this is a 2-cup cup. It's about 2/3 milk. It's espresso and milk and 3 teaspoons of sugar, organic raw sugar. Where was I? So she wanted me out of the house, and the Navy was taking officers directly out of high school because they were short on officers if you could pass a whole bunch of tests. So I went to an Air Force base over the Easter break, we used to call it then. It was only a week in those days. And I had a terrific time. I was suddenly with young guys that were just like me, they were just as weird as me and as gung-ho as I was, and we all wanted to be officers. The majority of them were trying to become pilots, but there were some naval types that just wanted to be naval pilots or naval officers. So they examine every orifice on your body, they do, and part of the medical was I had to sit in some kind of container. You have to remember this is an Air Force base, and 3/4 of the guys there wanted to be pilots. And I sat in this thing, and they said, "You can't be a pilot." And I said, "I don't want to be a pilot." And they said, "That's good." But apparently my legs are so long that if I ejected, I would eject minus my legs. So I would not fit into a jet fighter. and they weren't going to waste time just if I was going to become a helicopter pilot. You have to fly a plane first, preferably a jet plane. A couple of my buddies that I went to naval officer school died in crashes, so they were pilots. That's another sad story, part of my life. Anyhow, I went into the Navy, and they loved me, and at age 19, they slapped a gold ring. Oh, I signed on for 7 years, and at the end of 7 years, they were supposed to give me 7 months pay and allowances, and that would have been enough for a year of university, and I wanted to study physics. I'm really into physics. But they took me directly out of high school, and a year later I was an officer, and they taught me if you act like you're in charge, people will come to believe you actually are. They taught me how to be an officer. I'm a really good officer, and I'm really good at taking charge. Do what I tell you, do it now. Do it the way I tell you to. Anyhow, I went off to England I asked to go to submarines, they sent me. I navigated a repair ship for a year. I was a navigator on a repair ship, and then in 1967, when I was 22 going on 23, I went to England and learned how to drive submarines, and then I went off with the British Navy for the next year in training and being a working officer on 2 different submarines, HMS Opportune and HMS Tiptoe. On HMS Opportune, I was in training, but I went down to South America and back and did some major exercises, and actually went full speed ahead in a submarine, and we did major war exercises in that submarine. It was terrific fun. I really enjoyed being in the submarines in the British Navy. They were great fun. And then in 1968, word got around that there was this Canadian officer over in England serving in British submarines, and why was he there? And the reason I was there was I was paying off a Canadian contract to provide labor in exchange for England having trained a lot of Canadian submariners. So, and I was waiting to join a new submarine being built. I'd met most of the other officers that were going to be on that submarine. But I got called back to Canada to HMCS Ojibwe, and I didn't get along with the captain like that. My life just started going downhill, and the Navy was not fun anymore. And there's a lot of stories I could tell you about that. But among the beginning was just after I got back to Canada, the commander submarines called me up to his office and like, what are your plans, boy? And I'm like 23 years old and just been promoted to a lieutenant. I had a dolphin on my sleeve, but the Canadians said, you have to, I wasn't qualified in Canada. I had to do it all over again, start all over again to qualify. I was already driving British submarines, but I wasn't qualified. I learned later that there was a thing against British trained officers. The Canadian commander at the time in 1968, even though he had commanded a British submarine himself, he had some sort of beef with the Brits, and the whole culture was American trained, and this Brit trained officer, me, suddenly is plunked into them because they were so busy, nobody was getting any leave, and they heard about me floating around, and they wanted him back, and I was out there driving HMCS Ojibwe. So the commander asked me what my plans for the future were, and I told him I had about 2 years left in the Navy, and I was going to go to university. He went through the roof. He said I couldn't do that. You know, I'd signed on for life, and I pointed out that I guess nobody noticed that I didn't. And I'd been offered a permanent commission several times, but I turned it down. And the reason I turned it down was when I was 22 going on 23 and living in England, I finally figured out what was wrong with me and what gay was, and I was it. I suddenly realized that I'm not the only guy on earth that's my way. There's a whole bunch of them out there if you can just figure out where they are and how to find them. But this was 1968, and I could not tell the Navy that I was gay. I could be thrown in prison. It was against the law. And I would certainly be out of the Navy within 24 hours with a dishonorable discharge. So there was no way I was going to tell them that I was a faggot. But and I was too naive to mention that I was going to leave the Navy. So my life went downhill, and I didn't know I got followed by the military police. But A couple of months later, I was transferred to the NBCD school, the Nuclear Biological Defense School out in Spryfield, out in the suburbs of Halifax somewhere. And the commander of the school said, I don't know why you're here, son, but just mind your own business and come in at 9, go home at 5, Monday to Friday. And then I got a letter from the Navy telling me I was going to be dishonorably discharged for a whole bunch of things they made up. And they forgot that they'd hired a very smart boy, and I had read the Queen's regulations and orders for the Canadian Forces. I knew what my rights were. And one of my rights, because of a Canadian mutiny that happened in 1948, was to immediately file a redress of grievance, because I wasn't out yet. Still had some time. It was several pages long, and I pointed out a whole lot of things to the people who were trying to throw me under the bus. And one of them is that this grievance is not going to be settled until I'm on the floor of the House of Commons, because if nobody could answer my grievance, and they weren't going to be about to, I had the right to take it all the way to the House of Commons, and Butchie Boy was going to do exactly that. So 24 hours later, they offered me an honorable discharge and 7 months full pay and allowances, and I took it. That was my first encounter with my problem with being a faggot. I had a long and interesting life, and I had a boyfriend. I had a couple of boyfriends, and I learned that I don't fit into the gay community at all. I'm not into drag. And in my old age, I never was much of a drinker except when I was in the Navy, and these days I don't have any interest in drinking at all. I'm a pot smoker myself, and I have been for 40 years, really. These days I live in chronic pain, and I also have to take painkillers all day long. Where was I? That was my first... see, this is getting to be a long video, and I don't give a crap because I'm making a video. It's my video. This is my channel. And you're here listening to me for some reason, so here you are. I try to be entertaining. I'm an artist. I'm an artist 24/7. My whole life is a big art project, just being me. If you get to know me, Google me, Yahoo me, or whatever, Bing me, Chrome me, whatever you young folks do these days. Terry David Silvercloud or David Silvercloud, you'll find me. I'm pretty interesting. Where was I? So I got involved with standing up for gay rights, and I won't get into my stories about doing photography for the body politic and stuff like that, but I'm going to tell you a story about in 1973. I had been working up in Kelowna in a residential treatment center for, they called them disturbed adolescents, and they could be there for any reason. They were basically the kids that there was no place to put them, and these kids really were best served if they weren't close to any community at all for any reason. And they could include arsonists or kids that were just a bit... One kid grew up, Robert. Robert was my favorite kid. Everybody was terrified of Robert. I don't want to cry. So Robert, he was a really good kid. He was an arsonist. And nobody would sleep in the same cabin with him because they were terrified he'd set it on fire. So there had to be one staff person in any place where the kids were sleeping at night. They were not allowed. No kids were allowed. We had lots of cabin. It was like a camp. It was called a camp. And we had 12 boys on average and 6 girls, and they were between the ages of 12 to 18. At 18, they weren't kids anymore, and somebody else had to take care of them. If they were under 12, we weren't prepared to deal with them. And my job mainly at that time was called the junior boys. There was about 8 of them or so, and one staff member tried to look after 4 of them, and I tried to keep my eye on the other 4. They could be real terrors, these kids. We were 6 miles from the nearest road, so if they wanted to run away, they had a long walk, and they used to try and steal the vehicles. We had the vehicles locked up in a paddock with big chain locks, chains around the steering wheels, and they still stole them. they were, they laughed at the locks. I learned how to pick locks from those kids. They laughed at locks. Yeah, locks, right? Sure, that's going to keep us out later, dude. Uh, Anyhow, great kids. I love those kind of kids. And why am I talking about this? Robert, yeah, Robert. He was, I don't know how I see I have ADHD. Anyhow, in this job, I might remember why I was going to talk about Robert. I don't remember now. I was certain he was an arsonist. And I got to talk to him a lot. And I would, when I was on shift, I would spend the night with him. And we couldn't deal with women, or there just wasn't enough staff half the time. There was we had a lot of kids that were really hard to control, to watch, and so I had lots of chats with Robert. And I remember my very last chat with him at night. It was in the dark, and it had been a night where one of the staff had come to me and he said, Robert's broken into the kitchen, and they were all terrified. He's just a little guy. They were all terrified of him, so they came to me because I could control it. The kids loved me, and I wasn't going to be afraid of them. They're kids. So I went up and to the kitchen, which was closed. There was snacks out in the rec room, but he wanted a P&J sandwich or something. I don't know what he wanted. But there he was, making himself whatever he was making, and I walked up behind him and put him in a lock and just walked out the door with him. And we got a couple hundred feet from the kitchen, and said, I'm going to put you down there, Robert. So I put him down. He said, you must really like me. And we just walked back to the cabin, and he went off to the washroom for an unusually long time for a washroom visit, but he was 14, so you can imagine what was going on there. He liked Superman comics. He would go off to the washroom with a Superman comic. So we had a long talk that night, and I had pretty much figured out, and I knew that teenage boys that set fires usually have sexual issues, and I was pretty sure that he had some kind of sexual issue. I didn't know what it was, but so without telling him I was gay, I somehow gave him a long-winded story about being yourself and not worrying about what other people think and all that. And the next shift that I came back on duty, I said, oh, Robert ran away. And I said, oh, great. Oh, that's how I got into this story. Robert, to tell you what kind of kids were there. Robert spent most of his life until he was rescued, locked in a closet. Robert was terrified of the world. Terrified. He wanted to always have a knife on him. He was terrified to go into town unless he was right there. So he was cured. If Robert ran away, he was cured. And I was just so sad that I never see him again. I don't know what happened to him. But Robert got cured. And I was so happy about that. But anyhow, I love this place. And then a new staff guy came, and he was looking for work, and unemployment sent him there. And I met him. He was just new, and there's this dude sitting out by the rec room, and asked him what was up, and he said, oh, he's just coming to see if he could get into childcare work and what it was all about. He'd been some sort of a sheet metal worker or something. He hated it. And he had no idea how to deal with kids, so I had to talk with him. And the talk was, they're just kids. Get over it. They're just kids. And ask them questions, don't get too personal. Just take an interest in what they're doing, and they'll come around to you. You're new. They got to sniff you out a bit and see what you're all about. Who's this dude? What's he think he's doing? So it'll take you a week or two. But eventually, Jim was his name, and I was living in a house that I was renovating and commuting back and forth to Vancouver, and we'd sort of become buddies, and I realized he smoked pot, and I smoked pot, and I didn't mind. He knew that I smoked pot. But one day I came out to him, and he didn't believe it. He said, "You're not gay. You're not queer. No way. You're not queer. You're not. That's not happening." But he eventually came to realize I was, and he wanted to, since we'd found out that all the other staff smoked pot too, because we just drop in on them and offer him a joint. You could get fired for that. And anyhow, he wanted to let the other staff know I was gay, and I was terrified. I'm working with teenage boys. I'll lose my job that I love. And I was really upset, and then I tried to get a transfer to a group home in Vancouver, and I didn't get it, and out of one of my emotional breakdowns, I just quit on the spot, which was other upsetting stories about leaving a boy named Freddie behind, who he took it pretty bad that I quit. I was his dad. I used to carry him around on my shoulders. He was 14. Bought him a blacklight poster for his birthday. Anyhow, Freddie was a real terror. He was he was Dennis the Menace on steroids. That kid was. But a lot of the kids were like that. So, see, I've talked a lot, and this was not going to be a long video, but I don't care. But I'm going to try and talk real fast now. So, being queer in my poor emotional state cost me to lose a job I really loved. I eventually went back a year later because I had to go back and renovate the house, and I went out to see what kids were still there, and down at the end of the dock talking to them, and some dude I didn't know came down and asked, he said, "Are you so-and-so?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I heard about you. Can we talk?" And he offered me a job, starting immediately. "Don't go home. Stay." Apparently there had been a bit of riot, and half the staff had quit the week before because kids with baseball bats were more than they could deal with. They're just kids. Give me that effing bat. Let's talk. I've had to do that. You're afraid the kid's going to whack your head off because he's got a baseball bat, and you say, this is a real life example. "Look, Elvis, we don't want to. Give me that give me that bat, and let's talk." So they were desperate, and they knew I was gay, and they didn't give a crap. They knew I was one of the best childcare workers they'd ever had. So anyhow, between the time I quit and the time I came back, I was working this is part of the story. I was working sort of part-time at a gay bar in Vancouver. Vancouver had gay places owned by gay owners before anybody in Canada. Toronto had the St. Charles Tavern, but that was not they would have called it a gay bar, but it was owned by straight people, and it was a beer bar, a beer parlor. Anybody could walk in off the street, off Yonge Street. So at the corner of Robson and Seymour Street, there was an old rooming house, and on the corner, just around the corner on Seymour Street, there was a double door, and it was painted black with a number on it, and there was no sign. You wouldn't know there was anything there. You had to know there was something there. So it was a bottle club, and that meant that you had to become a member, and I think, if I remember right, you paid $2 to get in, and you brought your own booze, which was marked. The beer, you just were given beer chips, and if you brought in booze, your name was put on it. And they sold mixes, and there was a DJ with 2 turntables and a whole bit. It was a really happening place in 72, 73 in Vancouver, especially if you had long hair and you were queer. So I was working there. Originally, somebody asked me to help out with coats, and then I became the bouncer, and you had to get past my arm to get into the place on a busy Friday or Saturday night, because there was lineups on a Friday or Saturday night trying to get in. And the police, they just left us alone. But this is sort of a police story. There were several police incidents while I was the bouncer, or the door guy. I never had to bounce anyone. basically, the idea was to make sure that whoever was going out, I remembered who they were so they could come back in, because there was no stamps or anything. I just had to remember who they were. And uh, you had to pay to get in. And there was a little cubicle with the manager behind bars, and he took your money, and then you got past my arm to get in. So one time there was a group of straight guys tried to break in, and there was a big squabble, and the police arrived, and the straight guys ran away, and the cop just turned to me and says, "You shut the F up or I'll throw you in jail." And the cops left. That was one incident. The next one was something similar. A big brawl happened at the door of a group of straight guys trying to break in, and I was the door guy, and I grabbed a broom, which was a big mistake, because by the time the cops arrived, I'd run out in the street chasing after these guys, and I had a broom on my hand, and I got arrested. I got thrown in jail, and I went to court for possession of an offensive weapon. Nothing ever happened to the straight guys, and I have a record for possession of an offensive weapon, which was a broom. The club didn't help me out at all. I was being paid $10 a night to be there, cash under the table. I had no money. I'd quit my job. I didn't have anything. I needed money. So that was not bad money, actually, in those days for that kind of job. But anyhow, the judge was Judge Proudfoot. She gave me a conditional discharge, and whenever I tried to stand up in my own defense, some prosecutor guy would say, "Here, say it." I was helpless. So that was for being defensive of my body. I now have a criminal record. And that was not my last encounter with the police, but I certainly spent the rest of my life not ever trusting any police officer for any reason, and doing my very best to never have any kind of encounter with them at all. So the next thing that happened at the bar was it was a Sunday night, and on Sunday night, David, the manager, took the night off, and I would do the cash. There was no doorman. It was a quiet night, and so it was a Sunday night, and I had just had a break and had a few puffs and was back on the job, and some guy came through the door and shoved a switchblade through the bars at me and said, "Open the door." Not in quite so polite a language, and I just leaned back and grabbed the phone and started dialing 911 for the police. And he started kicking the door down, and before I know it, the door is broken down, and I'm on the floor with a stab wound to my hand, and a stab wound right there. You can still see the car. That's where the knife went in, right there. So that wasn't really a police thing, but it's a queer thing. And that's why it is a police thing. That's why I wanted to talk about it. I was never questioned by the police. As far as I know, there was zero investigation at all. I was certainly never questioned. Tons and tons of people came to see me in the hospital, so many that the hospital started limiting who they could see, and some young guy came that I'd never seen before, and he was so hot that I actually had a brief affair with him in the hospital. The nurses brought us cake and tea. They knew what was going on. We had a hot little affair while I was in St. Paul's, recovering from my stab wound. All I remember is sort of being on the floor and totally stunned that you don't even know you're stabbed. You don't even know what the hell's going on. Did I say hell? Oops. And I remember being in the operating room and the surgeon screaming at the nurse to get the, not too polite, she kept wanting to know who am I and my name and things like that, and the surgeon told her to get out of the operating room. And bless that surgeon, he really examined me, and he decided that if I sat up the pain was up here in my shoulder for some reason. It was intense. But if I sat up, it wasn't so bad. And so he said he didn't want to operate because from the x-rays, it looked like the cut wasn't too deep. It cut my liver. He just wanted to make sure I wasn't bleeding internally. So I wasn't allowed any painkillers, and I would have to wait 4 hours to decide whether or not I was going to be operated on. And 4 hours later, they gave me some painkillers. Said, "You're okay now. You're going to be fine." My police thing here is, this is a bit about the police, is there was no investigation at all. So to wind this up, I'm an eccentric old dude, and I want to show you. You can see that, you see me here? I wear really baggy jean shorts. So my very last story, and I'm going to shut up, is, because this was going to be short, now it's really long, and hope it uploads. If you want to watch it, you're still here. You can come back to it later. My very last story was this last fall, and I talked to my doctor about it afterwards because I don't have anybody to talk to. And he said, "Oh, I've got enough issues to deal with my pain and all my medical problems. I see a doctor every 12 days, but I should just let it go. They were just trying to do their duty or whatever." But last fall, I was on my way to my local Safeway, which is 6 blocks away. And I had a little map I made here I was going to do. And give me a sec here. It was about 11 o'clock at night. Safeway, before it was owned by Sobeys, used to stay open until midnight. And I drank a lot of milk, so I realized it was going to shut, and if I didn't get some milk, I wouldn't have any coffee in the morning. So I was on my way down West 70th Avenue over to Granville to the Safeway to get a jug of milk. And I had just crossed the street, and flashing lights go on, and a couple of cops jump out of the car, and not being all that polite. And they wanted my ID. So I showed them my ID, and I said, "I know why you stopped me. I'm wearing a hoodie and baggy jeans. That's why you stopped me, isn't it?" And they said, "No, you jaywalked." And I said, "I didn't jaywalk." And what I meant was, this is my street over here, and to cross the street, there is no crosswalk. You just cross, and although West 70th is a very busy street in the daytime, it isn't at night. And I went along with it. And once they realized that I was a 72-year-old man, and I really was just going to get milk, and I just happened to dress like a teenager, and I'm really big. I'm nearly 6'3" tall. They were carding me. And I knew they were carding me, and I told them. But they got real polite after they realized that I knew my rights, and they let me go. So I kept walking along West 70th, and I had not gone another 3 blocks when suddenly a big black SUV with flashing searchlights is on me, and literally as I was going to cross the street, pulled in front of me. And I backed off, and I got a couple of German shepherds barking at me, and a guy in a military type suit, which I assumed he was a cop. I couldn't tell, I couldn't see a badge. And he's being extraordinarily rude to me and telling me to get back, get some distance, so at the risk of being shot to death with absolutely no witnesses. I stepped back, and he demanded my ID, and by now he's like 10 feet away from me, so I tossed him a card that looked just like this, and he picked it up. I don't think he liked the idea, but I wasn't getting close to him. And he was being extraordinarily rude to me. Extraordinarily rude, but I've been an officer, and I know that he thought he was just taking charge. He was basically being an a-hole and making me despise police. If I didn't distrust police before, he was doing a really good job of making my fears even worse. Anyhow, he probably saw, he had to actually look at my ID, so I know he wouldn't like that, taking his eyes off me, but we were keeping our distance. I'm like about 15 feet away from him. And I guess he realized I really was just an old dude on the way to the store to get some milk. And that's why I'm carrying a bag, because I carry my own bag. And I told him that I thought he was stopping me because of the way I was dressed and that he was carding me and that they were both illegal. And I thought his behavior was absolutely outrageous. And I wanted his badge number. He muttered something. I said, I didn't hear you. And I said, he got back in his car and I said, I'm going to report this. And I never did get his badge number, and I never did get my ID back either. It was a British Columbia health card. Fortunately, it was just expiring anyway, or not expiring. When you get your new driver's license, it replaces. I have one of each now because you can have one of each, but you don't have to. If you have a driver's license, it is your health card now. But that officer never did give me back my health card, and I told my doctor, he said, I'll just let it go, you know. But because of what's going on these days, and people telling their stories, and people tell me I have had a really interesting life and I should write a book, and here I am, I'm writing a vocal book. Not all of it, I've done so much. I don't like this world at all. I think this world is really barbaric, full of really ignorant people. Really, really, really ignorant people, and you may be one of them. Don't get mad at me because I don't give a crap. I'm butch. I don't think I'm going to be living much longer. I have real health problems, real pain problems. I live with chronic pain. I have for years. It's not fun. But I try to stay in shape. I'm butch. And I could probably outrun people younger, but have a risk of a heart attack these days. So I don't do that kind of thing. So I'm up to 36 minutes. Can you believe it? I can't believe it either. If you're still here, well, you must have thought it was interesting. I'm a physicist. I have a really good theory about the speed of light I'm trying to spread. You can... I made a video about it. If you go to my news channel, Butch News, you'll see a video about it. For those of you who aren't too scientific, it might be better to watch the video because the theory is quite simple to explain to a physicist. But if you're not used to physics, even simple physics might turn your mind to rubber. Light only travels, in a billionth of a second, light only travels about a foot. Just a bit less than a foot, actually. So, you know, in my world, because I deal in the world of subatomic physics, you have to bring light down to size. And if you were an electron, light to you, the stuff that we call frequencies and wavelengths of light, would all start to seem rather huge, like hugely huge. And the fact of the matter is we measure everything with electrons, everything. Even for a message to get from your eyeball to your brain requires electrons. So my theory basically for simplification is that the speed of light is entirely dependent upon both the physical characteristics and the physical size of one of the smallest solid kind of particle we know of called the electron. And that I think the electron has the shape of an icosahedron, which is 20 tetrahedrons with a common apex. And the reason I think that is I believe there is a smaller particle, which I call the gamma particle, and it is my belief that the gamma particle has the solid shape of a tetrahedron. So technically speaking, an electron is 20 gamma particles in a very, very, very stable relationship. And it makes it a monopole, so it repels all other electrons. The basic gamma particle doesn't have the ability to repel itself because it has 4 poles. But once you take on a spherical shape and aim all your antennae outwards, the same way they construct the fuse of an atomic bomb, the fuse of an atomic bomb is shaped like an icosahedron. That way you can have 20 shaped charges all come together at a common point at a common time. And if you only need 10 of them to achieve critical mass, then you still have a spare 10 of them that even if they didn't work, they'll just get caught up in the atomic bomb. It's easy to make an atomic bomb if you have the enriched stuff. That's the tricky part. That is the tricky part. How do you get that stuff? It's really hard and really dangerous. Okay, 39 minutes. Can you believe it? This is going to be the story of my life, I guess. So I don't know what I'm going on about. Once I realized it was going to be long, I stopped caring. I lost my cell phone yesterday. I think I can't find it. I've had that phone for 15 years, a little tiny Nokia. If somebody finds it, the most I'll be out is $13 worth of credits because it's a pay as you go, and they'll have no way of refilling it because they won't know the secret code. Okay, 40 minutes and 9 seconds. Where are you? All right, you're over there. This is a microphone. This is a microphone. This is a microphone. That's a microphone. I hope I have my sound working. I've been working so hard in improving my sound. You can leave a comment and say the sound was crap or the sound was good if you want to let me know. Bye-bye from Butch.